Kansas City Current, before they were the Current, there was FC Kansas City in the NWSL. It was actually one of the 8 founding clubs in the National Women's Soccer League that started in 2013, and they played all the way through 2027, and they won back-to-back championships in 2014 and 2015. They were part of this little bit of a dynasty, you could say, under Vlatko Andonovski, who was the head coach the entire time FCKC existed in the NWSL from 2013 to 2017. But when we think, Sandra, about the team that was in 2014 and 2015 that won back-to-back NWSL championships, what were some defining characteristics about the club or the roster in those years that you remember that stuck out so well?
Oh my goodness. Kansas City was that team that you never wanted to see your team go up against, whether you were a season ticket holder, supporter, someone in the press box. There's countless gritty grinder type of draws, I think, between the Chicago games and the Kansas City games that I saw back in those days. But they just absolutely were a well organized, well coached, well functioning team. And so much of that had to do with the roster that they had built, put together to compete, and absolute stunners as well. They could have a match where maybe 1 week it was one of those gritty grinder type of games where it's like a narrow victory, and then the following week it was they piled on some goals and made you look kind of foolish. I can recall their run in the 2015 season and in the playoffs, to sort of kind of maybe not having the form that folks thought that they should have had, coming off of a World Cup with so many players who were impactful in that, from an Amy Rodriguez or Lauren Holiday, Heather O'Reilly. The legs are heavy in a World Cup year in those early days of NWSL, and so maybe the form kind of matched that. But here they were in the semifinal, away on the road to Chicago, and dunking on them. It was a complete blowout. It was an absolute Lauren Holiday and Amy Rodriguez masterclass clinic.
Sounds like you still have nightmares, Sandra.
I mean, they're dreams, honestly. It was one of those things where it's just like, this is a beatdown so incredible. You're just honored to be there, quite frankly. And that's absolutely who they were and what they meant to the league. There was always this layer of respect whenever you knew Kansas City was in town or you were going to cover them. They weren't the team that was going to come in there and be kind of goated or flashy or loud. They weren't going to be the ones that had all of those kind of shiny bells and whistles. I think at the time, in that era, in that first decade of NWSL, it went the way of Portland Thorns, right? Or when you think about titles, it goes the way of North Carolina. And in between that, I think there was almost this layer of disrespect of not maybe having Kansas City in that conversation about with all the things that they had achieved at that point. And then maybe that comes with the fact with how they ended, because another huge component of that first decade of NWSL was a lot of figuring things out. And unfortunately, in a lot of figuring things out, there were not appropriate infrastructures in place. We have heard endless stories and have read endless reports about how things like HR departments were difficult for players to find, and how they had to kind of carry up this mantle of making sure that a league was sustainable, right? And those are all sort of scare tactics, abuse tactics, to kind of put that on the player and make sure that they are the ones kind of keeping things up. But as far as on the pitch, you want to talk about a team that did so much with so little. FC Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
I want to tell a story about my good friend Kim Little when we're talking about history of this team, right? I'll never forget. Me and Kim go back. We grew up together in Scotland, right? Played at Arsenal together as kids. And then she went off and obviously did her thing at Seattle Reign, MVP of the year. But I'll never forget this narrative of like, okay, we won the Shield, but we just couldn't get it over the line. And it was, who did they fall short with? Kansas City. And I will say, right, and she won't mind me saying this, Kim doesn't think that highly about a lot of other players. She is quite a high standard, but one player she always used to say, Lauren Cheney. Lauren Holiday. He was like one of the best midfielders she's ever played against. And she built it. She's such a player on international level, and obviously won back-to-back 2014 and 2015 with FC Kansas City. But that's the one player that Kim always used to say to me, she was so hard to play against when out here in the NWSL or back in those days. But that's what they built. They created history back-to-back. We spoke about it. It's the hardest thing to win once. Do it back-to-back. That's a top team. But yeah, they're kind of the history they built. And look, I do think when you bring it forward to now, that's the kind of culture and history you want to bring forward for Kansas City Current, because they'll look back at that, especially Vlatko. He's the consistent. He's the one that's been there, done it with this team, and wants to bring it to the current team now. So I think when you have a manager leading it like that, it's so important. But I'll never forget Kim coming here and winning the Shield, but not getting the championship because of, in her own words, Lauren Cheney. So
yeah, there's one player that stopped Seattle, right? I mean, that's what it feels like at times when you're playing up against someone like Lauren Cheney in both 14 and 15. And that's a fun little story about Kim Little. I love that. But this is a team in Kansas City that had some troubles towards the end of their reign, because in November of 2017, Kansas City ceased operations, FCKC, and then they were transferred to Utah Royals. Everything, the players, the rosters, the draft picks were transferred before then coming back as a reiteration in the NWSL as the team we now know as Kansas City Current. And there was this big talk when Kansas City Current was coming into the NWSL just a few years ago of how much of their history were they going to bring with them, the championships, was it going to be a new team, and trying to build on the history of what is a really big and influential soccer city in Kansas City, especially with Vlatko Ananovsky, who did have a little bit of a super team and a dynasty, if you will, with 2014 and 2015, but there was also some bad history that comes into it. And when you're building a team, you need to remember the history that you had as a club in the city that had success. Remember the bad things as well so that you can learn and get better from them. But it's not easy to start a brand new club and then make it to an NWSL playoff in 2022. It's different and it's very difficult, Jen.
Yeah, no, I think, look, I totally agree with what you're saying. It's a new project. I've always found that so interesting coming across to the NWSL and it being relatively new teams and clubs, right? Especially an expansion team, Bay FC. That was my experience. But I'll never forget, from my experience signing for Man City Women, who only created their team in 2014, right? I signed in 2015. And I will say the finances didn't necessarily go to the players. For me, it went to the resources that were arguably more important. So the stadium, like what Current are doing, the locker rooms, the kind of travel plans, hotels, making the performance resources really important. That for me was more sustainable long term. But I totally agree with what you're saying. They won a League Cup in their opening season, and I think that's what projected them onto what happened next. But the biggest thing, we always had the Premier League men to fall back on in terms of culture and what was already set. But the best thing to what we're saying to create legacies is to lift trophies, and we ended up winning the league 2016, FA Cup, League Cup after that. So we won things to kind of keep building that. But it was pressure. You're thinking, right, we're the ones being brought in to build this. So I think you have that massive responsibility as leaders and as young players and as staff and everyone. You're in charge of building that. That's what I loved being back at BFC last year, of creating that culture from the ground up. So I think it's a huge responsibility. I think who you recruit is so important. Again, I'll speak about Vlatko. I think you have to have a top experienced manager that has been in so many different environments and cultures and high performance cultures and know what that takes to go and win games. But I think what they're building but they do have history to go back on, I think, within the city, with what you're saying, the culture, the history of what the city means and being there and the stadium being built and building this brand to move forward is so important.
even the Kansas City we have now in 2025, or let's say 2024, where they build CPKC Stadium, it is a teal wall that hits you of color and fans and excitement right on the Missouri River. That wasn't even part of the vision that was public in 2021 when this club came in, and they still had to deal with coaching turnover and some issues in their front office that they had to deal with, players not being put in the best positions and field availability that they were playing on. I mean, there were still hurdles that this club had to jump over and try to get past when they relaunched in 2021. And now when you look at the makeup of the CBA, I mean, this is like a much deeper conversation, but players having autonomy and free agency to go wherever they want, it has forced clubs to be more desirable, whether it's because of the free agency or because of investment in it, thanks to Chris and Angie Long, the owners coming in, and Brittany Mahomes coming in as the ownership to say, let's build a destination where not only American players want to be, but international players say, hey, I want to be at Kansas City Current, not because it's a giant metropolitan city or because they've won a lot of trophies, but they have the structure and the system and the investment that makes me want to go there. I mean, even Lo LaBonta last week on our Live with Lo was talking about the off season and how much her team gets together. And she was like, and maybe it is because there's not as much to do in Kansas City as there is maybe for a Gotham that is just outside of Manhattan and New York City, where there are a million things going on all the time. Kansas City has to have a draw that is a little bit different than cities in LA, Portland, New York City that are going to offer something different, but they also have the investment there. But it wasn't always there from 2021 up until 2025. And this club has worked hard to draw in these international players, Dabinia being one of the biggest free signings that went to this club most recently, just 2 years ago.
I think that's obviously that's the most obvious, biggest key difference and factor for Kansas City Current compared to FC Kansas City, because these are two different teams. There are different ownerships groups. There's different players on them. There's different cultures around them. I mean, I remember FC Kansas City's departure just came, for all of these, rumored toxic environments for front office and players. It was across the board, and kind of absentee ownership, like kind of almost uninterested, like very much like hobbyist type of ownership, or just like you want to say you own a soccer team, so you just went ahead and got yourself a women's soccer team. And that's not the type of, we could see now, that's not the type of investment teams need to, if they want to be successful in NWSL. And so to sort of have, Angie and Chris Long, Mahomes, kind of come in at the midnight hour, because FC Kansas City got relocated to Utah, who also came in at the midnight hour to say, yeah, we'll take a team, only for them to fold a few years later. And Kansas City, a new ownership group in Kansas City kind of comes into the rescue. And history's there to, to make sure that it's not repeated, right? And so like even with Kansas City Current and their very tough inaugural season, what was it, like a high school baseball field they were playing on, not a good season.
Players wanted out.
Players wanted out. And now there was already the beginnings of like a potential just bad team culture or environment around that. And so to talk about this franchise in 2025 compared to their beginning in 2021, it's already kind of night and day a bit in terms of what's in front of them. A purpose-built stadium, an incredible roster, their facilities, and I would also include in that just the general engagement of fans. You go like, yes, for the players who are saying like, maybe we hang out a lot because there's maybe not a ton to do this particular week in Kansas City. But if you are someone in Kansas City, guess what is there for you to do? You can go to a women's soccer game in Kansas City. And like, that's a cool thing to provide for that community. That's also something that this team has provided for the city. It is this very entertaining, fun product.
And the city is very bought in. The city is very bought into what the Current are doing.
100%. So it's interesting to just sort of like see the night and day kind of stuff. And I appreciate how Kansas City Current have tried to pay honor to some of what was FC Kansas City, but not full on adopt that. Because I think if you are going to try to like reinvent a market that was once a failed place, I mean, Boston's a good example of this, as they make their return in 26. You have to start fresh. There is no ties to that old stuff. You really don't want it, but I do appreciate that there's some in a larger scope of things, like getting Lauren Holiday out to games, like, you know, paying honor to some of these legends of the past, like doing it.
That's a
Black
touch.
on the sideline. Like there's very specific things that you can point out and say, this is kind of cool, but it's not like they said, yeah, we're just going to roll out and be FC Kansas City. And I love that they are the Current.
Mm-hmm. They've done a very intentional job of rebranding and what they've done. Even the slow burn of ultimately getting a crest and a name of Kansas City Current didn't come when the team dropped in 2021. It started as Kansas City NWSL with a pretty bland logo, but they said, we want to get this right. We're going to play just 1 year as this kind of half-branded team, and then we'll go from there. And man, did they come out strong with that teal branding in the end. We got Teal Man, we got the full teal kits happening, and of course we have our Kansas City Current logo that features the current of the Missouri River going down. We're taking a look at the crest and the logo right now with the KC and the 2 stars. Those 2 stars not because of championships that this team has won, but I believe, Sandra, correct me if I'm wrong, they're in reference to the previous championships that the Current has won. Is that right?
No, I thought these are in reference to like the rivers.
Oh, okay. So I don't know anything.
Gracious. Someone will let us know in the chat.
But that logo versus
in the chat, and someone will email us and be like, "Hey, great show, but sorry, you messed this part
wrong." Listen to me then. Okay, that logo versus the old FCKC logo. Which one did we like better? Do you remember the old one, Sandra? It's blue.
Yes, band ponytails. There it is. We see it live on the show right now. Listen, I'm not gonna lie. I like the black and blue color scheme. That I enjoy. I do enjoy that a lot. Nothing like a gritty grinder team whose colors are black and blue, right? But I'm very glad that we are pivoting away in this next era of like ponytail bands. Get it out of here. I don't want to see it.
I love the modern color. The modern teal man stands out, and the red. I love it. I can't wait to see what the 2 stars are about, but we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm all for the modern.
The 2 stars. I looked it up. The 2 stars are for the 2 states, Kansas and Missouri.
There you go.
I got too much Chicago brain. I'm like, it's the river. It's like, no, that's a Chicago flag thing.
The 2 for that to be the 2 championships, I would have had something to say about that.
Okay. I would have been like, boo. I would have been like, give me the rebrand. No, that makes sense. I like the two state shout out for Missouri and Kansas City. I got a better follow up for this one. You have FC Kansas City versus Kansas City Current. Both teams in their prime. Who's taking it?
Wow, that's a good one.
They both have Lola Bonta.
I was going to say, what
have Blacko?
Both. They both have Blacko.
Yeah, they both have Low. They both have Blacko, and they're all healthy and they're all in their prime. Who's
I'm going to give it to FC Kansas City because that coach Vlatko Ananovsky will know Temwa Shawinga's 1 or 2 weaknesses, or like how to potentially slow her down, get her off her game, and the nitty gritty of FC Kansas City back in their dominance of 2014, 2015 would just be a little more tough and rumble against the 2025 Current.
I like it.
I'm going Current.
Okay. Why?
Yeah, I think their form this season, and we said it themselves. FC, they didn't finish top. They were struggling coming to form. You were saying that in the 2015 league. Okay, they went on going to win the final. So I'm going to say consistent performances. For me, the Current are showing up in not like the old days.
It's a tough one for me, and I'm the one that presented the question. But I'm going to say I'm going to give just the slightest of edges to FC Kansas City because, and you know what did it for me? If Kim Little's out here to this day in 2025 saying that team was a wrecking ball, I'm gonna give that edge. You know, Kim Little was the tipping point for me, so I'm gonna say FC Kansas City.